everyone. Welcome to the brand new episode of Grow with the Flow. Today, I have Will Sanders, who is a Recruiterflow user and founder of Recruiting from Scratch. Recruiting from Scratch is 2.5 years old recruiting business that has seen explosive growth. They've grown 16x in last 1 year. And we are going to, get Will to spill all the secrets about that. Before this, Will worked at Mojo Vision as head of talent, and he graduated from Carnegie Mellon University. Will, welcome to Grow with the Flow. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me today.
Well, it's really my pleasure. So, Will, first things first, right? So, what led you to? So, you've been pretty steeped in the recruiting as in technology industry. But what got you into recruiting, and what got you to start recruiting from scratch?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think most people have the same answer of how they got into recruiting, which is accidental. I can't say when I finished graduated from Carnegie Mellon, I thought about recruiting as a career. But one thing I did was I probably looked at every type of career path you could do, from consulting to investment banking, product management, strategy and ops, marketing, sales, and I applied to a lot of roles and didn't do too well. And I always realized I was sometimes better at making introductions and recommendations for friends and finding jobs than myself.
Mm-hmm.
So it, was somewhat of a natural process when I ended up worked at a company called Mojo Vision, and they mentioned they needed to hire a VP of product. And I said, sure, I'd never hired before, but how can it be that bad? I like sending cold emails. I didn't mind getting on the phone with VP candidates for the role, and was able to get a hire. And he's still at Mojo Vision after, I don't know how many years it's been, 4 or 5 years. So that was the first hire I ever made, and he's still there. So it kind of was just a natural thing for me, given what I like to do. I liked really understanding a business and all the different roles, and it seemed like a very effective place I could go in and find great people to work at a company. For starting recruiting from scratch, that was a bit different. Once I left Mojo Vision, I was looking for a new recruiting role, and the nice thing about Mojo Vision is they gave me a really probably larger role than I deserved, because I never had done recruiting before. But I grew the team from about 8 to 70 in a year and a half.
Wow.
Mojo Vision is building an augmented reality contact lens, and very technical roles. Probably half of what I hired was a PhD. Probably had a PhD requirement for the role, across all disciplines. And I couldn't really find the right role that I wanted to do. And after that, I didn't really want to work at pick another startup early, because I never quite know which one is going to do well. And the first recruiter job is not easy. So I ended up becoming a consulting that led into starting a company. So that's how I ended up getting starting recruiting from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
It made sense at the time to make that jump. I'd always wanted to start a company, and mixing those two things together, recruiting and entrepreneurship, led me to starting my own agency.
Yeah, that's wonderful, because to be honest, I got into recruiting quite accidentally myself as well, right? So my last company got acquired by another large company, and they gave me a very unrealistic hiring targets, and I just wasn't very happy with our internal recruiting team. So I was like, okay, how hard this can be. It's find some people on LinkedIn Send them cold emails and pray to the gods that some people will respond back to you, and you take it from there. And yeah, which is actually my experience over there was the genesis of Recruiterflow. So it's been about 3 years. How has the journey been? How has the growth and evolution been for recruiting from scratch?
Yeah, it's been a few different business models I've actually tried. So I originally started 2018 in San Francisco, where recruiting was very different then. Location was San Francisco. You'd have the challenge of someone not wanting to commute from the South Bay area to the city. And I was working with RPO model or embedded, so I would have a small team and act as part of the company, have an email. It just got a little overwhelming. I think at one point I had 8 company emails from different startups.
Yeah.
Ones like Digit, Newfront Insurance, Scale AI, a lot of different companies. So it was a little tough to track, and I decided RPO wasn't the right move for me. Happened right around when early 2020, and then COVID had happened, which going from signing on new clients the week before to just hiring stopped. I think signed on 2 or 3 clients a week or 2 before COVID.
Wow.
And then they just ended the contracts right after that. So business slowed significantly, and I took a little break from that business of recruiting. And then early 2021, I decided I really wanted to switch to direct hire and work on contingent. So taking a percentage of the base salary, and you either win or potentially make nothing. So I've always been, I would say, fairly competitive, and enjoy that way of running a business. And also much easier to keep things internal, especially the data, our candidate notes, having clear boundaries around what our org does and does not do with our clients, and a lot more flexibility around, with those contracts, given if a client, both sides, if a client is not a good fit for us, it's fairly easy to end that contract. There's sometimes that money exchange, which may not be the best for the business, but much easier to, come back later and try recruiting with a different recruiter, whatever it may be. So I've had a lot of growth in the last year. Added on, we're probably sitting around 40-ish clients at the moment, and primarily recruiting software engineers, roles in data, product managers. Sometimes we'll look at hardware, do some of those roles, but really trying to stay focused on I would say primarily software and product managers.
Sure. What made contingent the right choice? Right? Like you still had, retained executive search. Maybe there's a tremendous demand for hiring software developers on contract, right? Like 1-year contract, 6 months contracts, and those. So you had contract staffing on one end, and on the other hand, you had retained work. And I'm sure a lot of the contacts that you made over 6-7 years in tech, a few people would definitely say yes, that I can trust you enough to give you a retained assignment and go from there. What made you pick contingent?
Yeah, I think one is just easier for me to manage expectations. When you do RPO, there's periods. Either if your pipeline is not working, the client is just very tough to sell a candidate to. It's really tough to build a pipeline and kind of guarantee you can get candidates moving. And then there's a lot of capacity around it. It turns into scheduling and intakes and really being very involved with the internal team. With contingent, it made things were just much easier for myself to manage. and I really enjoyed it by being able to take on more clients and really find the right opportunity for the candidate. So we can send them many different directions rather than, trying to, really push candidates to maybe one or two, probably one company for doing RPO. So I really like the option of letting candidates, see what opportunities are out there, and also taking our, best assessment of what may be a good fit based on what we know about the client and what they're doing. So I really enjoy that model, and I've done some executive search, but it's really, I think the volume is just not high enough for what I like to do. I really enjoy creating volume, thinking about how to scale. An executive search is much different in terms of the speed, the types of conversations you're having, very different type of search. And I just have not done that as much. And I really didn't enjoy it as much as, finding just high volume recruiting.
Yeah.
So it led me to, the path of really choosing software. Because that's usually the most, consistent hiring. It's very rare that a company will stop hiring software engineers. It does happen, but they're always willing to, hire another engineer. So for choosing that path, it made the most sense of, what I've done before, what I've hired for. And I, felt much more comfortable doing that than moving into something like executive search.
Interesting. Yeah. So I was the other day I was talking to Dandan Zhu. She's also a recruiter, and she talks about how contingent. So she loves contingent, right? And that it allows you to do two things. First is optimize for outcomes for the candidates. That is first, and second, live in a very high pace. It's also can get a little bit stressful, but high pace, high risk, high reward kind of an environment. And if you're the kind of person who can thrive in that kind of an environment, then contingent might just work very well for you. So would you say you're that kind of a person?
I think there's a way to, to find a balance of, with contingent. Growth is definitely been a little challenging of growing the business and finding, finding recruiters that can consistently deliver. And I think our team is a bit different because I've found people that have not done, had traditional recruiting experience or have worked in other industries or haven't even worked in the tech industry, so there is a bit of a ramp up, which makes our team, I think, brings a really different background than what you'd find at other agencies. But there is, a way to really mitigate risk. And I would say I'm more conservative around how I'm spending money or, and using our cash. So there definitely is risk. And, as we've grown, the need to deliver, instead of just 2 recruiters on the team, now there's 8 technical recruiters. Needing to deliver there is a bit more challenging. But as long as I think your financial models make sense and you've mapped out your cash flow well enough of what you expect per month, you can really mitigate the risk. But of course, there's always, the market factor that you never quite know what's going to happen. But it seemed like a very exciting time to grow the business and, see what we can do, especially with a market that's exploded in really the last year.
Yeah, no, we can see that, right? Like in last 1 year, recruiting from scratch has grown 16x, which is kind of crazy. But there's something very interesting that you do, right? Like a lot of recruiters that you hire are not from either recruiting or tech background. What is your thought process there, and how did you arrive there?
Yeah, one challenge is when I was making my first hires, they really needed to take a risk on me and join the business, which, could mean trying to guarantee something that they may not is the really not getting either the compensation they're looking for longer term. There's job instability when you join a company, when it's just myself. So which led me, to finding a bit more junior candidates or people that haven't done recruiting before. But that also allowed, spend a lot of time investing in them and really making sure that I taught them on how to source, how to recruit, how to interview candidates, work with clients, and be really hands-on. And even now, when I'm looking for recruiters to join the team, it's just such a competitive market for senior recruiters that I don't always find someone that I think could be a good fit, and would much rather, find someone more junior and take a risk, on having them join our team, and within a few months, hoping they can deliver and really get them up to speed, similar to what you'd expect from someone more senior. So that was really the biggest thing I was looking at, is actually being able to hire, a more senior recruiter.
Okay.
It can be really tough to, I have friends, they move to Facebook or they move to a just larger tech company. They get paid very well. It's less stressful than it would be at an agency. And a lot of people just hate agencies. They just don't even want to go back, or they just have a bad impression of what it can be. But I've always focused on, people deliver here, they get paid very well. Competitively, they're not really taking a pay cut joining an agency. And we also really like to focus on finding amazing clients to work with, right? Places that engineers want to work. We work with plenty of companies that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars and, have just exponentially growing valuations. So you also get to see really exciting companies. But I think just with the demand for recruiters right now, it can be very challenging to find a senior recruiter with comp expectations that are really tough to pay with guaranteed comp at this stage.
Yeah, makes sense. Two questions, right? So what does your playbook, if you can scale two things right here, like one, create a framework of, okay, somebody doesn't have either recruiting or tech background, but with whatever background that they have, a framework of saying that, there is a reasonable chance that this person is going to become a top-notch recruiter in next 6-12 months. First that, and second, during that first, that ramp up period, giving them the support, the training, the sometimes even the motivation that is required to get them there, right? So what does your framework for both of these things look like? So what kind of things that you look for when you hire, and what is roughly the playbook to get them to ramp up quickly?
Yeah, and what we've done even for our internal interviews, we have a pretty structured process we've mapped out to internally. So when I'm looking, for anyone applying, I think the first thing I look for is just even at their resume, is it formatted well? Is it professional? And, do they, regardless of education or anything, is it easy to read? And I think education, it can be a good signal for recruiting of just picking things up quickly, but there's that's the initial thing, is just even the resume, which I think could be quite a good signal. And one of the first steps in our process is we'll do an assessment, which it deals with, how do you send an email? What information, when you look at a profile, do you think about? If you look at a role, what candidates would you source and why? Try to keep it pretty short, but I think gives a good idea just of the thinking process or thought process, how someone is looking at a role, looking at a candidate, why they're choosing them, how that relates to the job. Of course, knowing there's a lot of information they don't know about the hiring process, the company, they've never done an intake meeting, but we'll give an idea of, what they think about that job and candidate. So there's a pretty methodical process we have, and at the same time, really looking at making sure there's grammatically everything looks good, given the job now has turned a lot more writing than anything, because it is remote, so that's quite important. And then once I'm screening them, the team is screening them, we really focus on different traits. So project management, we're looking for traits of like being persistent, asking. I think there's a balance of asking questions, but not asking too many questions when you're looking at something. So being cautious of that, because we want to make sure that if there's too many clarifying questions around something, that could be really tough for someone trying to ramp up in technical recruiting. But we try to get as much of the team involved as can, which is about 4 or 5 people in the interview loop, and a lot of steps in the process. So, and we differ a bit just depending on seniority of the candidate. But it's a pretty methodical process that we've mapped out and the team has worked on. And once someone joins and is ramping up, we use a few tools. So we try to create great, really good documentation, just really of our process, what we're doing. So a lot of this is just consistently working on improving our coda documentation. And we also started using WorkRamp, which is a LMS system to help really ramp up our team members. But at the same time, encouraging people to ask questions in our public Slack channels. Mm-hmm. But it is a very hands-on process that we have over a few weeks. And breaking apart roles, we have a sourcer role that exists, and we have a technical recruiter role. So each of those has a different onboarding process too that we'll go through. But it's still consistently improving that process. I don't think the training never stops for the recruiting team. There's always, especially someone junior coming in, there's always one teaching them the workflows that we use, teaching them about the clients, teaching about how we work internally. Especially being a remote org, it's very different. I've only met a few people, on the team in person. Right. So they just happen to live in the New York area. But that makes it another challenge, right? Needing to make sure we give very clear direction, because they can't just go up to someone and ask a question. It's much more challenging. So we're still, always working on the onboarding process, and always working on just continuously training the recruiters, always looking at ways to get better. Sure. But we focus a lot on collaboration, making sure that, if we do ask in a public Slack channel, other people can answer the question. They're not, DMing me directly, asking me about something, and really encouraging people to do that, not be, afraid of asking questions, as given that I think that's always beneficial, just making sure to encourage that. And it's been quite helpful.
Yeah, no, so one of the hiring frameworks that we also deploy here at Recruiterflow is, especially for the junior roles, we don't really care what you've done earlier. What we really care about are the tenacity, because in a fast growth environment, things can change very quickly, and we want to make sure that you can keep up with that. And second is curiosity, right? So if you're curious, you will understand things pretty quickly, which can be immensely helpful for you to do not just your job, but also grow with the organization. I want to understand a little bit from your perspective that, in your opinion, what makes you different from, let's say, I think there are easily more than 100 search businesses just in New York that do product and engineering.
Yeah. I mean, that's always a tough question to answer, because as a services business, especially in recruiting, I think I have an obsession of just like really, we've worked with some amazing companies out there that have probably some of the highest engineering bar that I've seen. So we're also very comfortable hiring for those companies that require the engineer to have the perfect background, all the way down to a maybe later stage or private company that's been around for 20 years, but really understanding the caliber of engineer, the fit, and like defining that ideal candidate. And we're also very, given we are a remote team and started as a remote team, I prefer to work with companies that are remote, will stay remote and do that. So I think that can be very different in terms of how we do recruiting. And our volume could be quite high. I like to find ways in which, Recruiterflow has enabled us to do that too, and in different ways of like really increasing our volume. So I like to try to, especially on sourcing and finding candidates, keep quality very high, but be 10 times more productive on like finding candidates, reaching out to them than we could be, or other organizations. So there's end of the day, we may be the best, partner to work with for some clients. Other ones, definitely could work with a different agency. Yeah. But really, I think it's the obsession with quality, of candidates. In the, with the recruiting team that we built and the talent team we built here, I think making sure we have a diverse recruiting team, which, gives a different perspective in the candidates we're looking for, and going after. So making sure we can help our clients build diverse teams also. So there's like definitely a deep obsession with quality of candidates, really understanding how to recruit for those companies that want to grow 10x in a year and, raise $200 million. And that's where I've recruited, and that's what I've done. It's just recruiting for startups, recruiting for venture-backed companies, really understanding that space well. Yeah. So it always is a tough question with services, yeah, of differentiating. There's some businesses are, I think a challenge too is, scaling just capacity wise and trying to like keep that quality and scaling. And I think some firms haven't been able to do that. Yeah. And a lot of, some of my friends that ran recruiting firms have now been acquired by different startups. So, the market, some of those more well-known recruiting firms have been acquired by like Patreon and Robinhood. So a bit different of like what the market looks like now too. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, it's not the easiest question to answer, especially in a business like recruiting. But it always helps, at least to me, to get an idea about how different people think, right? Like, for example, you talked about obsession with the quality of the candidates and the scale at which you can operate, which in the end, like, how many other recruiting founders are out there who are thinking on the same axis? Maybe not a lot. So that ends up becoming your wedge into the market, on how you're different in this, super competitive space. So you started using Recruiterflow year and a half back. I'm not exactly sure. Yeah. So what made you pick Recruiterflow, and how have we helped you grow and scale? Yeah. I think the agency market for software is, it's always somewhat disappointing. What, I wish all the venture-backed companies that raise a lot of money are focused on internal teams. So, there's a lot of softwares I couldn't use. They just don't fit our use case. I I think looking for, you know, a pretty easy to use software that's, you know, the other big one is just Bullhorn, which I think is a little, it's tougher to be closer to the product, right? And maybe make recommendations that could work, which I always enjoy with, you know, teams that are still, I'd say, building for growing companies instead of, you know, there's one recruiting tool in particular that I always have trouble with that will never take feedback, and you can never get to the product team. And, you know, they've been acquired by a large company called Microsoft, but I have different issues with them. But I think, you know, I actually used Lever when I first started, which doesn't make any sense, but it has great integrations with LinkedIn and different tools I was using. Recruiterflow has, you know, many features that I've found, just like customization is, you know, there's great features through it, and you know, really focus on automation as a big part of what we do. I try to always, you know, the mix of Zapier and Recruiterflow makes things, you know, just a lot easier for the recruiters, because it could be quite a mess, like trying to track these different systems. It always is a mess right now until we, you know, internally can build any software. But there's just a lot of mess that happens in recruiting, you know, a lot of different ways you're getting data, either emails, you know, automated things from Greenhouse or Lever, text messages from a hiring manager Slack. So I think Recruiterflow can help solve, you know, has solved some of those problems. And really, there's some good hacky things you can do with Recruiterflow I won't entirely mention, but I found it to be a great tool, you know, for generating pipeline. Yeah, and it's, you know, worked really well. It's just overall the agency market there's only a lot of the tools that are built for recruiters are built for internal teams, which is a little frustrating.
Yeah.
But it makes sense.
Yeah, no, you're right. And that's basically why we decided to build for agencies and not for internal talent acquisition teams. Last question, Will. What is one book, one podcast, something that has had, you know, a really outsized impact on the way you think, the way you look at the world, and something that you would, you know, highly recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I'll keep it business focused, so maybe boring, but I used to commute from San Francisco to Saratoga, which is about an hour and a half each way. So listen to many podcasts, and this is when I was working at Mojo Vision. But I always like listening to entrepreneurial thought leaders that Stanford has. I mean, that was kind of the original entrepreneurship podcast I listened to, and just like incredibly high quality speakers, just talking about, you know, their entrepreneurship journey. Although not many recruiters on there.
Yeah, no. I do remember Peter Thiel was on that course, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
There's the list of people on it is
I do remember Reid Hoffman and Peter Thiel, and I know that, you know, just reading some of the stuff that Peter Thiel talks about has had like a massive impact on the way I think about building a business, right? Yeah. So, no, I can get behind that. So I'll try and find that link and description.
And I have a book also. This is one that's I read it years ago. It's more sales focused. It's called Winner's Dream by Bill McDermott. He was the CEO of SAP and really focused on, you know, how do you motivate sales teams and motivate people, you know, to do well. So it could be in times he's taken the, you know, worst performing region to making it the top performing region, which I think, you know, very similar to recruiting, right? You're needing to motivate people you really have to put in the work for recruiting to be successful. So, you know, how do you motivate people to do that? So that I always, you know, think of that book, and I really enjoyed reading it. I think it's great for management of, especially on the agency side of anyone that's, managing producers, which also is a big difference of internal versus agencies. I mean, you're managing more. They're almost salespeople. They are salespeople in a way. So they're producing revenue, which internally, your costs to the business instead of producing revenue, which is very different. You can motivate people in very different ways doing that. Because every time the recruiting team is usually the first thing to go on a layoff, which for our business, it's very different, right? They're producing, so we can look at things differently.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and that's the reason why the entire tool set, pretty much everything, right? Like even though it's recruiting, the talent acquisition versus agency side there's a massive amount of difference. And I like to think a lot of things in the greed versus fear kind of a framework, right? So agency recruiters are very greed driven. They have incentives in place. It's a very quite inside sales environment. On the other hand, the on talent acquisition side, they're more driven by following processes, making sure that you remove bias and things like that, but not really focused on the velocity. It's not fear, but it's definitely not a very greed driven environment, right? So
yes, very 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 different ways of compensation structure that I've done of recruiters here versus what I've done internally.
Yeah.
The numbers, if they produce, can get quite big. So, it's one of the philosophies I have here of just paying people very well, which I hope reflects on making it a place also that people want to work, which I really focus on. But really changing too of like what it means to, what does it mean to work at an agency? Is it a place that has like a 3 out of 5 on Glassdoor, right? Is it the place you hate to work, or can it be fun? Can it give you the flexibility you want, and you get to hire for amazing companies? So really trying to also change that and build a company that when I graduated a year or 2 out of college, like, would I want to work here? And that's what I think about too. With all the things, does it pay me the money I want to make? Does it give me the growth I want to do? Do I get to work with these companies that I would like to work with, that I don't really know which role I could work with them in? And that's something that motivates me to keep building and like growing the company too, which has also helped with how fast we've grown in the last year.
Yeah, no, that growth has been phenomenal. Well, Will, thank you so much for sharing your journey and learnings with us. Have a great day.
No, I appreciate you having me on the podcast, and it's I'll make sure to keep submitting tickets in for product features on Recruiterflow, so you'll see those again soon. So I appreciate you having me on the podcast.
I'll always look forward to more product suggestions. Thank you so much.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Bye.